started. We'll work with it. We'll make it right, for sure. So hello, everyone, and welcome to Friday Night Chats. Friday Night Chats is sponsored by the Love Family Christian Foundation, where our focus is redefining leadership through intellect, cultural competence, and excellence. So tonight, we invite to the chat room Crystal Hardie Langston. Welcome, Crystal.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Oh, let me just tell you a little bit about Crystal. First of all, our topic is cultural leadership, how to effectively negotiate diversity and equity in C-level positions. Crystal Langston is a graduate of UVA with a BS in Commerce, Marketing, and Management, and she has an MBA from Fuqua School of Business. She was also a Rollins Scholar at Fuqua School of Business, where she also studied abroad at the University of Witwatersrand. Did I say it right?
Wits is fine.
In South Africa. South Africa. She serves as Principal Chief Diversity Officer at the Vanguard Investment Group in Malvern, Pennsylvania. Vanguard is an investment group with approximately 6.2 trillion in global assets. Crystal Langston's outstanding portfolio and professional career consists of the following positions: Principal, Chief Officer and Head of Specialty Programs, Principal Corporate Strategy, and Principal Head of Vanguard Retirement Plan Access. Crystal has received several honors and awards. In 2007, the Diversity MBA Journal honored her as one in the top 50 corporate executives under 50. In 2011, she was featured in the Profiles of Diversity Journal as part of the Women Worth Watching series. In 2012, she was nominated as one of the top influential women in corporate America. And in 2016, she received the 40 Under 40 Award from the Philadelphia Business Journal. Crystal, we are so excited to have you in the Friday Night Chat Room. Thank you for coming.
It is my absolute pleasure and privilege to be with you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Crystal, I'd like for you to share your story before we get into the questions, because there's so much about your background, not just within diversity, but just how you progressed, within the company and working with corporate strategy. There's so much to your background I'd like for you to share with all of us, because we are excited that you're in the chat room and we want to pepper you with questions afterwards.
Excellent. Well, Dr. Love, it's so good to see, the both of you, the two Doctors Love. You all are absolutely family. So it's my honor to be here. And it's a pleasure to see all of you. So relative to my story and my journey, I have been at Vanguard for about 15 years. And, prior to Vanguard, I was getting my MBA. I was working in investment banking before that. And, on the heels of that investment banking experience, I knew what really connected to my values and I knew what didn't. And so during my MBA, I was very intentional about trying to find a place. And so it was funny that you reached out to me about things associated with culture, because that was the top criteria for how I made the decision about what was next. And, funny enough, I was interviewing for jobs at different financial services companies. I was always interested in financial services because I thought ultimately it would help me help our community, the Black community in particular, with some of what we don't have in terms of legacy from a wealth perspective. And so I wanted to just learn and understand what opportunities were available to me. And, I started to interview with a lot of different firms and organizations with friends of mine who were also interested in financial services. Now, I was in grad school in the 2003 to 2005 timeframe. And so a lot of my classmates went to work for Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns. And I was interviewing at these organizations, and my heart just wasn't in it relative to some of the things that I could see might be my path. And I remember my classmates saying, you just have to suck it up. This is just what it is. This is just what you do in financial services. You just pay your dues and you get through it. And I started working with some folks to take a lesser known path to finding other organizations. And a friend of mine happened to interview with Vanguard. He met them at a conference. I didn't even see them there. And he got to the interview round in Malvern, Pennsylvania. He actually got to go out and meet with the teams. He drove back to Durham. And on the way back, he said, "You have got to call Vanguard. I just found your place." And I said, "What is that?" First of all, where is Malvern, Pennsylvania? He said, "Well, it's 40 minutes west of Philadelphia." He said, "But I've just experienced it." And he said, "It's really hard for me to describe it to you, but it's all the things that you said that you were seeking, that we were teasing you about looking for in financial services." He said, "They're really focused on ethics, integrity, and their reputation is everything. There's something about people development and the way that they coach and develop people that I'm feeling and experiencing." And he said, you gotta call them. And in fact, I think I just interviewed for your job, because even this job that I interviewed for sounds like the thing for you." And so I just happened to reach out to that recruiting team, got connected, got a chance to come out to Malvern, and instantly could feel, I know what he's talking about. And year over year, I got experiences that only built on the prior ones. And, I started in a client facing role. So that role that he was interviewing for, that I ultimately had the chance to step into, was a relationship manager role. And so it was about client experience and service, which I didn't realize until later in my career has always been the foundation of what I've had an interest in, is service. And so I got to do that with clients, helping them to figure out how to offer retirement services to their employees. And the first clients that I had were 403B clients. So they were universities, other nonprofit organizations. At the 403B retirement tool at the time, it was just really hard to attract participants to invest. Folks would just say, "I'll get to it, I'll get to it." So we were literally on the ground trying to help convey the importance of saving, for one's retirement. And so I loved the work, loved Vanguard's, mission and approach. Following that, I had a chance to get into leadership roles at Vanguard. And so most of my journey was client-facing leadership roles. I had a chance to rotate through corporate strategy, which was an incredible time to be connected to some of our enterprise projects that formed the basis for new business ventures and other things, new products and services. I then had a chance to lead our small market 401k offer. And so that was about us launching a 401k offer that could serve the needs of small businesses. At the time that we launched that business, we were seeing that small businesses were being overcharged and underserved for the same services that other companies were getting better access to. So it was a pleasure to be in that role. I then went out on maternity leave in 2017 to have my now 3-year-old Christopher, who is magnificent. I can't even think of a word big enough to describe how amazing he is. But my husband, Jeff, and I were blessed to have him that year. When I came back into work, I actually had the chance to step into the HR organization. And there I led our Vanguard University team and our specialty programs for undergraduate and MBA talent. And then I actually had a chance to help interview candidates for the Chief Diversity Officer role for Vanguard, which wasn't a new role. The organization was just looking to retool it. And as I was paying attention to the work and what was needed, I decided to throw my hat in the ring for it, because I thought either we needed someone from outside that could come in and infuse new perspective, or we needed someone who really understood the culture internally and could over-index in bringing in external perspective as part of the work. And so I've been in that role now for about 2 years, and it's been a fantastic journey.
Excellent. Now, how does your role at Vanguard contribute to the overall goals at the company?
Yeah, so it's I always tell our CEO and our senior most leadership team that I'm not sure that this would be my job at a number of other organizations, because Vanguard actually sees the work as critically as we do our investments.
Okay.
And as importantly as we do the outcomes of our clients. So when our CEO talks about our most important strategic priorities, it is the advice services that we provide our clients.
Mm-hmm.
It is being a good steward, of their assets, because it's not our money, it's our clients' money.
Yes.
And it is how we make sure that we do that with highly engaged, diverse, communities of talent who feel included in our culture. So the fact that he was so willing to make sure that diversity, equity, and inclusion was at the center of our strategy and how we operate was what made the role compelling. I have a lot of counterparts in this work that are challenged with getting senior leadership attention to what they're doing. And that has not been the case at Vanguard. The last thing that I would say relative to that, Dr. Love, is it's also central to the way that we evaluate our people. And that was an accountability lever that was being built before I even stepped into the role. We've called out specifically that you're not a successful leader or crew member. We call our employees crew if you are not developing others, driving results, building expertise, being candid, and cultivating difference in the environment.
It's funny because we have some educators on this line and they are applauding you silently because they understand the need. When you transfer from corporate to education, it's a different environment indeed. And so, yes, you are teaching from the textbook, but to actually integrate those principles, it's a bit difficult to do. So we're loving it. We're loving this dialogue, believe me. Believe me. So another question for you. So what events align as Chief Diversity Officer? What events align with the mission and vision of the organization? You have touched on it, but what has happened recently because of Black History Month? We just finished celebrating Black History Month. So if you could share with us some of the events that took place at Vanguard. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started in this role in 2019, we started ensuring that just from an outcome perspective, that we were overall being very intentional about diverse representation and an inclusive culture. And that's something that we've tried to make sure people understand one can't do without. So a lot of our programming centers around, the combination of the two. You can have lots of diverse representation, but people won't stay if they don't feel welcome. You could also have high inclusion scores and people feeling really good and like they belong. But if there's not diverse representation, that means you have a lot of like people that love being together because they're the same. So we try to make sure that everything that we do from a programming perspective only reinforces the importance of those things. And recently we started making specific reference to equity as a part of our work, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I'm currently in a series of town hall overviews and, beginning of the year strategy discussions, helping to really explain what equity is and the difference between equity and equality. I know this group, could probably teach several classes about this, but we're really trying to make sure that people understand, equality is absolutely equal resources, for everyone without enough regard to the fact that folks are starting from unequal starting places. And so with equity, it's like, hey, let's meet people where they are and understand the difference in those backgrounds relative to how programming is developed, how the talent development process is carried out. So that's been a fantastic journey. As a part of our experience, and while we try to drive leadership accountability for the outcomes that we seek, we also have what we call crew resource groups. They're typically employee resource groups, but because of our employees being called crew, we refer to them as CRGs. We have one for women, we have the Black Professional Network, we have one for Asian professionals, Latinx professionals, out professionals, and veterans. And what we've been talking a lot with those groups about is the concept of intersectionality. And so we've got a history of them sort of doing their programming relative to their target demographics. But in this next phase and in this next evolution, we're trying to make sure that we don't build programming that sees people in silos. And so intersectionality is about literally what is the intersection of these different characteristics of people. And a lot of the work is focused on instances where those intersections are marginalized dimensions. And so Kimberly Crenshaw is actually the leader and educator who conceived of it. And women of color is often the example, that she uses. You both have the identity of being a woman and of color. And what does the intersection of those things mean? And so we're taking our women's initiative and making sure that they are partnering with the Black Professional Network to talk about the different needs between the white woman experience and the Black woman experience, the different journey of an out woman versus a veteran woman in the programming.
What's
And
the out woman? What's an out woman?
So LGBTQ plus.
Okay.
Yes. And so we, from a programming perspective with Black History Month, we actually had our crew resource groups come together, on behalf of some of the programming to really explore some of the different dimensions of the Black experience. So between last year, we've done a couple things over the years, and I'm a proud co-founder of the Black Professional Network. And some of the things that we've done over the years is help the whole of the organization learn about the history of the Black church in the sort of Black cultural experience. We hosted last year what used to be the Center for Talent Innovation, but they now call themselves COPWL. They did some research on being Black in corporate America. So we invited, our entire enterprise to come and hear and listen the dialogue about microaggressions and experiences in the workplace, and then have discussion, with their fellow crew members. In 2020, we shifted a lot of what we intended and focused very intentionally on education, because we heard our non-Black crew ask, how can I get more perspective on the history of racism? And so we literally had a speaker come and talk through the history of systemic racism. This year, we featured the history of the Divine Nine, or the sort of Black sororities and fraternities, to really tell that story as part of the cultural experience. We've had a speaker actually just this past week who came in and talked about the impact of the pandemic on the Black community. We've done some features on the 1619 Project, which the New York Times released, I think, a couple of years ago now. So those are some of the things that we've done for Black History Month.
Well, thank you for clarifying the difference between equality and equity, because with equality, you are allowed access, but if you are not prepared to utilize those resources, then it doesn't mean anything. You would never be equal, right? Is that the correct interpretation?
Yeah, it's interesting. Each of them sort of have, diversity kind of asks who's in the room. Inclusion asks, have they been heard? And equity asks, who is trying to get access to the room but can't? Okay. And so it absolutely aligns, with what you said, and we are trying to help, particularly with the advent of more focus over the last year and a half on D&I and DEI. There's also this groundswell of question about, well, with more focus on D&I, who is that going to exclude? Are white males now going to be, excluded? And it's like, no, not at all. In fact, you're a critical part, of this journey and of this experience. But let's have equity help you understand how you have to contribute to the facts that there are different history and different backgrounds associated with the underrepresentation of certain talent, in my case, in a corporate context. So that's why we are building this sponsorship program that is just targeted to minority talent. that's why we are doing this particular development experience for women. And we'd like you to join in and what it means to be coaches and mentors and sponsors. But that is why you're seeing groups get different access to different things.
It's interesting that you mentioned Lehman Brothers. I did not know that that was. I don't know. I think you all had your parents had moved to Atlanta by then. Yeah, and you were in graduate school. But yeah, that's a God thing. He protected you. He
Yes.
absolutely protected you, but also you had that discerning spirit. You knew that wasn't the right path chosen for you. Yeah, excellent, excellent. So, Crystal, how do you define success?
So, when you first say that word, I think about how I would have answered that question, maybe 20 years ago,
Okay.
and how I answer it now. And, particularly given, the state of the world. And so I think of it on a couple of fronts. My family's safety and, my family's wellness is success. My child thriving is success. My parents being well, and my brother and his daughters being well, that to me is success. It's funny, I actually did a values exercise with some of my colleagues last week. And, there's a battery of maybe 30 things, you can choose from. And family security and family health was a part of that. My own personal health was a part of my top. My spirituality, was a part of the top five. And those things, and economic security, not wealth per se, but economic security, just in terms of like being able to do some of the things I want to do to serve my family. Those are the things that are success to me. And then when I think about it in my workplace, I only get my experience, and the fact that I chose Vanguard validated every year in terms of like the people who often are the most successful are those that have left other people better off. And I think that is a successful organization. We measure our success by how our clients do and how our shareholders do. And when they don't do well, we don't do well financially either as employees, and so to be so in alignment, values wise with an organization, that to me is success. I have lots of friends and colleagues who are in places where they have to make ethical decisions, that are stressful, but that appear to just be normal course in a lot of places and organizations. And the last thing I would say is I also think success is about, again, like what you're able to do for others. And that comes quite a bit from my family roots. All four of my grandparents were servants. And it's, I think, the price we pay to be here. And so to be able to carry that out and fulfill that, to me is success.
Now, your desire was to increase financial literacy among African Americans. What challenges were you faced with?
Yeah, in the work, it's interesting. There's the work broadly, that needs to be done globally, nationally. And then when I think specifically about the Philadelphia area, which is where Vanguard is headquartered,
Mhm.
we live in a city with some of the highest poverty rates, in the country. And so we as an organization, have sort of scanned the landscape for what kind of impact, we can have on that. One of the things that we decided to do some years ago when we sort of did the research and we talked to partners about how to best sort of book these trends proactively, there's lots of body of work that talk about the importance of a strong start in kids, in the sort of education systems. And so we literally have a strong start program, where we focus a lot of our community efforts on the children and families of children in those K through 5 years with access to education. while we continue to think about, what kinds of educational things we can offer to address financial literacy in other ways. We have a program called My Classroom Economy that we built. I think we celebrated 10 years of My Classroom Economy just last year. That really is about a toolkit. We have My Classroom Economy and now My Home Economy. That's a toolkit that families and teachers can pick up for K through 12 in the classroom version to literally start to teach some of these concepts that, again, I certainly didn't get in school at any level. So how do you start to just introduce these concepts of budgeting and sort of long-term perspective in investing one's dollars that, again, we just don't really find built into a lot of our education systems.
I had a student who did her thesis on wage disparities, and great intentions, but it took her out into deep water, and she didn't know how to circle back around, because it basically opened up other areas that sort of, she emotionalized a lot of the experience. It was almost traumatizing to her, but she wrapped it back around. I consulted with her and she wrapped it back around, and it turned out to be a really good thesis. But it's one that she lives, that she's living every day. And so she's trying to develop models to basically, and strategies to effectively address those issues. Because I told her, this is just one step in your dissertation. So I threw that word out, dissertation, so she can think about pursuing her doctorate. But it was a very difficult topic for her. Absolutely, very difficult topic.
Well, and Dr. Love, I think the thing that's going to be so interesting about the events of the last, year plus now is, the corporate community is in a, much more engaged way thinking about, their opportunity to affect some of these things. And I hope that continues, but I think financial services firms in particular, there's a number of initiatives that have surfaced and collaborations that are being discussed, and groups of CEOs talking about what it means to ensure that there's access to financial products and services to a greater degree than has been the case. Literally, like the digitization of certain things will help defray cost of access to things like advice and that kind of thing. So I'm excited, about what could come from that.
Well, my final question is, I know that you haven't been with this organization for a while, but can you just touch on your experience with the Urban Tree Connection?
Yes, so I had the pleasure of serving as an interim chair of the board for Urban Tree Connection just before my son was born. And I actually became familiar with it through a couple of colleagues who had served the organization. And the founder, Skip Weiner, who's since retired and I think living a fabulous life, I believe in Costa Rica from some years ago. So he had this idea in the Philadelphia area. He was seeing in a number of blighted communities abandoned plots of land that you could walk through and find all kinds of drug paraphernalia. And there was all kinds of just broader activity that was certainly not helping the communities. And so he learned about the sort of rules and regulations of getting access to what appeared to be abandoned plots. He gained ownership of them and started to beautify the areas. And his initial focus was beautification by way of parks, and play areas for kids in those communities, which were often, heavy populated by underrepresented minority communities.
Sure.
And then over time, he recognized, and through him is how I learned about this concept of food deserts, which I didn't even know about, just how lacking in proximity to healthy produce certain communities were. And he decided, okay, what I need to do is take this land and not just put pretty flowers on it, but see if the land can yield food, that can be sourced directly to the communities around these plots of land. And that's really what Urban Tree Connection was and is all about. Since I've transitioned, I know they continue to do incredibly, great work with community residents on the board and community residents in leadership roles, so that there's a true partnership and not just sort of outsiders coming in, directing and telling folks what to do, but literally a collaboration to help improve the circumstances of the neighborhood.
So the community, you have community partners that are invested. Yes, I love that. Yeah, I know some of those areas in Philadelphia, so very well. Yes, every year, that was my summer, trip from Virginia. My family trip, I should say. Every summer I would spend there. But I'm going to open it up now for others to ask questions. I know that there are a lot of questions they'd like to ask you, so feel free. Or, I can act like we're in class and call out people, but I won't do that right now.
Well, you don't have to, because I have a question, teacher.
Very good.
Okay, well, first of all, I just want you to know how very, very proud we are of you.
Thank you.
I don't know how often you hear that, but if you don't take away anything from our time tonight, please know that you are such a blessing to all of us. And certainly to have the skill sets of having a service of heart, or how can I say that? You do. You have a heart that's filled with service, in addition to financial savvy skills. How cool is that? Okay, so I do have two questions for you. Number one, you talked about meeting people halfway. If you could share perhaps some behavioral examples of how you do that within your corporation. And then secondly, you talked a little bit about your career aspirations, but I want to hear more specifically, 3 to 5 years from today, where do you see yourself? I have a couple of ideas in mind. For example, receiving that terminal degree, coming on back and working for us over there, Justin. Just saying. And hey, who knows, maybe even running for president of the United States. So please share with us those two responses.
Well, Terry, thank you so much for your question. And I'm going to have to call you every morning just to get a boost because I so appreciate you and your energy. And so in terms of kind of meeting people where they are, we are talking about exactly what that looks like. And it's funny, when we started talking about the word equity, it's almost like you could feel people, waiting for the boom of what's going to be this complex thing that I need to do for the equation of equity. And it's like, these things are actually not that difficult. They just have to be prioritized in the way that we show up. And so first and foremost, it's like, you can't really meet people where they are if you're not having a conversation with them about what that is and getting to know them and understanding their motivators. And so one of the things that we built, Terry, and we refer to this as managing inclusive partnerships. It's just a program name, but it actually, this incredible woman that joined my team in February, who built this experience in a prior organization and said, you know what, we should really replicate this here. And it's all about minority talent and their relationship with their direct leader. And so what we do in the experience is day one, the leaders are all together in one room. The crew members are all together in one room as minority talent. The leaders are sitting together, having a facilitator talk them through the headwinds that minority talent faces in a corporate context.
Okay.
And getting to ask questions and dialogue and learn together. While the leaders are doing that, their minority talent is sitting in another room, really exploring tools and techniques that they can use to try to overcome some of the hurdles they faced on their journeys. The next day, the group all comes back together and The thing that I should mention additionally is before the experience, each party does a set of assessments so that the leader is getting a probe for how inclusive of a leader they are. The talent is getting a perspective on how they show up, in sort of the leader's frame. So that on that last day, when the two come together, it's a day full of breakouts for the leader and the minority talent to talk about things that they probably would have had no occasion to talk about before.
Right.
Like, really, I scored here on inclusive leadership. Like, tell me how I show up to you. And the minority talent is saying, I wasn't really comfortable telling you about this thing because I didn't want it to be held against me, but this is this thing that I struggle with.
Right.
And so you start to build the foundations of trust that often people just presume are there.
Yeah.
And so the actual practice of doing that, and then what we do is we tell that leader and minority talent pair, this is great. Hope you had a good experience. We're going to give you an assignment. And that is to take the things that you've learned and action plan with the boss's boss too in the conversation, so that the trio comes together, talks out the action plan, and the boss's boss can hold that leader accountable for actually participating and showing up in the plan. So we just did the first series of that last year, and it was hugely successful. We're trying to figure out how to scale it, but taking the time, which is often too what's just critical, like slow down enough to like really know people in order to be able to meet them where they are, and then be able to go ask and request for resources that help them show up in the way they aspire to. And then in terms of, what's next for me, funny you should ask, because education is certainly never far from my thoughts, especially as I think about, the experience my son is about to have, as a student, and my husband and I are talking about that now, and experiences that some of our friends' children have had, and even our son, who's only 3, but we've already experienced bias.
Really?
He's had in daycare, which make us both want to build a school from the ground up. And, just have him there where we can see him all the time. So I certainly have been thinking a lot more intentionally about what it means to have an influence on the education system, but I haven't really formed my thinking completely.
That's okay. We'll give you 2 days.
That's excellent. Wow.
Yes, very good. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Stein.
You're welcome, sweetie.
Who's next?
I have a question. First of all, I want to second what Dr. Stein-Merrill said as far as being proud of you.
Yes.
You have an excellent story. I can relate to a lot of things that you experienced and things that you were thinking about. But touching on kind of your direct experience with the DEI work, I know it's not an easy area to navigate and be in. So you're kind of working up against a lot of like things like opposition, things like that. And so how do you stay motivated through it all? Like when you face those challenges and people are not necessarily buying in or things like that, how do you stay motivated with what you do?
Thank you so much, Maurice. I appreciate the question. It's a pleasure to meet you. It's a real and great question that you ask, and it's a real topic among the Chief Diversity Officer community. There is a real dialogue about the self-care that Chief Diversity Officers in particular are having to prioritize. And I'm a part of a couple of groups that formally come together, and folks are just sort of pouring their hearts out about the level of stress, the pain, and the resource and haven they are having to be for other people when there's no one they can turn around to in the organization to get that from. I have had the blessing of a leadership team that has my back and my front. And it is just, I can't even tell you what it feels like to know that and to hear that, to be able to engage with a CEO who gets it, who is vulnerable himself, who talks about, the journey that he's on, who told me upon taking this job, I want you to make us uncomfortable. And so to have that articulated permission and that authentic, permission and welcome from him and every single one of his direct reports, all 11 of them, has been important. What is, of course, challenging is sort of the experience that would be inconsistent beyond that group of our senior most leadership team. But what I value is sort of the relationship capital that I've been able to build in the organization, the forums and platforms that I've been able to have leading up to this role that help people in the organization see my intentions. And so even when I get, messages from someone who is not that crazy about the fact that I hosted the author of White Fragility for the enterprise to view, or isn't in love with, this concept, I've had those people articulate it respectfully, and engage and want to engage, and have a dialogue. And I'm certain there may be others who are just less willing to engage. But on the whole, I have definitely been able to go to not only friends and colleagues that I've worked with for years in that organization, but a leadership team who truly supports me. And I'm sad for a lot of my colleagues who don't have that and have to do a lot of self-repair at the end of some pretty rough things that they've experienced and haven't been protected from.
Thank you.
Additional questions? Thank you for the question.
Hi, I had a question. So you mentioned, thank you so much for coming on. You are so amazing. Thank you for being transparent. Thank you for just teaching us about a subject that I really just didn't pay no mind to. Like, just, it was just out of sight, out of mind. But as far as like financial literacy, when it comes to, you spoke about K through 12, is there anything that adults that you guys are doing for the adult community right now?
Not sort of specific to financial literacy in and of itself. We are trying to focus on the build of advice and our advice offer, which has education woven throughout. And so, we've had a history of, products and services that help people accumulate and achieve their financial objectives, but our advice endeavors to help educate within the process of doing that saving. And so we have invested in and continue to invest in platforms that help with the education all along the way for our individual investors. And then we do have a significant suite. So for our participants who actually work for companies that give them access to our funds through 401ks and 403bs, we offer participant education materials and meetings and workshops that those companies will host us at to sort of talk through the best way to think about, the compounding effect, on one's investments, and how to think about how to allocate, your dollars across certain types of investments. What kinds of things you need to have your funds default to, what kinds of risk, appetites should you be assessing for yourself? So we do a lot of that, in that arena. And then on our website, there's lots of things that people, can choose from. But as you become a client, particularly in some of our advice offers, we gear up our client-facing crew to be those educators throughout the course of one's individual financial experience.
There's a lot of educational resources on your website. Yes, yes, I
Yeah.
really appreciate that. Yes, yes. Other questions?
Can I sneak a question or two in? For you, Crystal.
Absolutely.
I'm trying not to make it too global, but I was really interested. I know that the audience, particularly as you rebroadcast this, as you put this out for demand, a lot of students and a lot of adult graduate and undergraduate students will be looking at this. And one of the things you talked about that I think might, if you could expand on it a little bit, I think might help them and all of us really. But it's that transition you made from being in leadership in the operational end of your business, and how maybe the things that you learned in that process that helped you transition into this next phase that you now find yourself in. What type of transferable skills that you see in yourself and things that made you help you to be successful there? And if you don't mind, I'll tag this one on the back end. The piece that you touched on about legacy building, the importance of the information, the education that you're doing with your clients, particularly as you deal with minority, under-resourced, underprivileged individuals areas. Not just the what, but do you get a chance to talk about the why that's important for families and for individuals as they establish generational wealth, legacy building, purpose-driven type of, that's kind of big. I know that's more than a 90-second response, but anything you can do to touch that, I think would be great.
No, absolutely. So it absolutely was a build of experiences over the course of my journey, which is one of the things that I really value about Vanguard. I truly feel like I had sponsors that I wasn't even always aware of. And one of the things that we try to make sure that leaders and crew understand is the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. So like a mentor, like, this is great. I can close the door. I can talk to you. You can give me advice and counsel. Thank you. Very valuable. But what we know is that people of color and women tend to be over mentored and under sponsored. And the sponsor addition is, yes, I might still get that advice and counsel. Absolutely. But a sponsor is literally going to go into a room and pound the table for me and remove obstacles, out of my way. And over the course of my journey, I can point to very specific people who did not look like me, who in some instances, I didn't find out until later had been those advocates and those sponsors. And I always wondered how I got asked to do that, or who knew that I was maybe even interested, or who thought to give me a chance in something that I didn't know that I could, have an interest in. So as I reflect on my journey, every experience literally built on top of the other. And that is also a signal of the importance of talent development. Like, we literally dedicate and devote significant time to talking about the paths of our talent and our crew and what they should do, and rotating. We rotate quite a bit, which is why I've had so many different roles, because rotating through different opportunities and not feeling siloed is the way you learn, like on the job. So when I came, when I did express an interest in the Chief Diversity Officer role, my CEO asked, he said, you've been a successful leader in the business. Like, what makes you want to step into this? And I said, well, I think this is a business problem. When we think about representation in organizations, and just as you mentioned, Dr. Love, the translation to financial inclusion in the marketplace, and how left out of that, underrepresented minorities in particular have been. And he said, completely agreed, sold. And so in this job, I am drawing from my client-facing experience, my relationship management skills, problem-solving skills that I picked up running a P&L and, leading a corporate strategy effort. I am finding those things show up in every facet of what I'm doing in this work. And in fact, some of the chief diversity officers in other organizations who have been great mentors of mine are folks who also had business backgrounds. And they are regarded as some of the more successful chief diversity officers because they had exposure to other things. They solved problems in different contexts. And they also established credibility with business leaders who gave them more regard because they knew that these folks understood their circumstances.
Yes, excellent.
So that's been huge. And then, your point, absolutely. The interesting thing is I feel like increasingly if Chairwoman Maxine Waters has her way, you know, a lot of our financial services organizations will be, you know, expected quite, you know, significantly and soon to really answer questions about why, you know, the dial hasn't moved on financial inclusion. And they are asking, you know, Congress is increasingly asking more questions of why not only is there more, you know, talent of color and women represented in senior most financial services roles, but what impact is that going to have on, you know, the legacy building ability of people of color, you know, in this country, if we don't right some wrongs, you know, that have happened historically. So a lot of good dialogue, but I think it'll be interesting to see what change actually happens and at what scale.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
Thank you. Excellent.
Political office? I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you. Dropping a seed. Other questions?
Yes, I have a question. Thank you for being with us tonight. I really appreciate getting to know more about you and getting the idea of what you went through in life. I have to tell you, very blessed. And a lot of us did not have the same experiences you have. So for that, I get to see both sides, and that is good. I'm glad that you went through it, and it was a great journey for you. My question is, I've experienced a lot of, not myself personally, but, you know, people, you know, of color as well. You mentioned something about that in terms of health, and I find that very true. I didn't really kind of put that together until you mentioned that. What I have noticed based on my experience, like when I go to the doctor's appointments and things like that, there's some doctors, well, I take that back, some clinics, you know, you have to have they check your temperature. And I went to one doctor's office and didn't do that on the next person. Of course, the next person is not a person of color. That offended me a little bit. My question to you is, with the health, I know this might not be within your range of expertise. What would you suggest a person would do in that experience in terms of how do we work with doctors and medical professionals, making sure they're giving us equal access?
Gloria, you ask I'm pausing because I'm moved by the experience and the question, and I'm thinking instantly about conversations that my husband and I have had about healthcare and some of the experiences he has had, you know, interacting, you know, with doctors, where it's just like, gosh, that was quick. You know, that seems so transactional when I'm clearly in need of something more, or, you know, wow, that seemed like a really abrasive, you know, exchange unnecessarily. Would that have happened if, you know, I can remember when our child was born and we were searching for a pediatrician, it took us quite some time because we interviewed, you know, folks effectively. We asked questions, and we looked for doctors of color, you know, very intentionally and unapologetically. When I was having Christopher, you know, this was when there was so much more attention placed on the mortality rates of, you know, Black women giving, you know, birth, and, you know, how lacking attention was being paid. I mean, we were like frantic about how to make sure that we found a practitioner who really listened. And so, you know, I don't have a good pulse, Gloria, on what some of the factors are that will change that. I only hope I have an opportunity to engage on behalf of that at some point, but I honestly don't know what change is on the horizon for that. And I think it's going to be so important, especially after everything that's happened with COVID. You know, there's a vastly different experience that we're all having on behalf of health, physically and mental, now. And so, like, the need for therapists who are culturally competent, you know, is so important. One of the things that you do make me think about, Gloria, is specific to mental health. We actually hosted a speaker who came in and sort of talked to us about how we could build experiences specifically for Black talent that just allowed them to decompress and self-care, because not only were we all showing up at work having to contend with these things, you know, we had non-Black colleagues seeking solace and haven too. And so she was talking to us about how to do that. Meanwhile, we all have these employee assistance providers that we are contracted with, that you should be able to call when you need childcare, or that you should be able to call when you need help with, you know, your parents' nursing home, or that you should be able to call when you need mental health yourself. A lot of those providers that are these big entities don't have cultural competence in their offer. And so their ability to actually help people that don't all look the same, or sort of have different dynamics in their background, is limited. And we actually just changed ours last year as we were assessing, because we were like, this is so dated, like it can't help anybody in a contemporary way. So I think, you know, it'll be interesting to see what we as a corporate community do to join forces with and contribute to, you know, what happens in healthcare, because healthcare touches all of the people who help us advance, you know, our missions to our clients.
Thank you so much for sharing. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, it is 7:29. So is there a final question?
I do have, if I can have like, since you mentioned that you're kind of in the work of financial literacy, I am, so outside of the Judson bubble, what I do is run a very, very small nonprofit organization that is committed to increasing health literacy. So what words of encouragement would you have for me or anybody, I guess that's kind of pursuing something like that? Because, I mean, you guys kind of just touched on it. I saw a problem with patient-provider communication, and some of my research actually surrounds patient-provider communication and the lack of effective communication and its impact on health outcomes and things like that. So what type of advice do you have just for anybody pursuing something like that?
I think the first thing I think about is how you can get, you know, connected with people who can invest in and support, you know, what you're doing is such a critical topic. And, you know, how can you get connected with other organizations or with other entities, you know, who have resources to lend, you know, so that, you know, that the whole sort of two is better than one. You know, I think joining forces is important. One of the things that I notice is there has been this sprouting of a lot of different efforts to close some of these gaps, you know, that have happened. But even just coming from the corporate community, a lot of us are looking at all of the things that have popped up, and we're spreading ourselves across so many, when we're just like, man, we wish some of these would join forces and, you know, become like central entities that we could just invest in and just kill it, you know, all together as a big whole rather than a bunch of several parts. And so as I think about your aims and objectives, I think even just being able to join forces, you know, that helps scale, you know, what you have to share and what you're contributing and the value that you bring, and just have other like-minded people, you know, share different ideas and perspectives that lead to creativity and innovative ways of doing things, because you're taking of your effort, your passion to get these things done. And I think scale is everything. So just being able to seek out additional partners that can help you would be the first thing that comes to mind based on the criticality of what you're looking to do.
Crystal, thank you so much for just taking the time. Maurice, did you have a follow-up comment before I jump in?
No, I was just saying thank you. Thank you.
Maurice is my golden child. He is looking to pursue his PhD. And so we were looking at diversity and inclusion and public policy. So Yeah, I'm so glad to have him on and asking those critical questions because he
Oh,
comes
that's
across
amazing.
as shy, but his resume is impressive. It really is. Very
Well, I
proud.
look forward to seeing what you do next, Maurice, and the impact you're going to have just on behalf of what you just described that you're going to do. So I'm excited for you and for all of us on behalf of what you're going to do next.
Amen. Amen.
So Crystal, thank you so much for your depth of knowledge and taking the time and sharing all of your information and experiences with us. You give us such hope in a lot of different areas. And so for everyone that joined, thank you for joining. I'm going to get off of here before Crystal sends me a bill. Right now it's pro bono. I'm so thankful. But
Now
I
it's Christopher's story time. And we sing our wind down songs. So thank you for hosting me. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you all and to meet all of you. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
God bless you, dear.
Bye-bye.
God bless you.
Thank you so much. Have a good night.